Good evening, everyone. I'm very thankful that you all could join me for another Hebrews 10 Bible study. Today, we're going to be discussing Exodus 8, and we left off in Exodus 7 with the week-long Nile being turned into blood. The week had just ended, and we pick up right here. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. And the rivers shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. These frogs would be everywhere. Now, I don't know about you, but if if I have a flea, literally one flea in my home, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like it. It has to die before I'm allowed to be comfortable anymore. Now, you just imagine frogs everywhere. They make it into these cracks and crevices everywhere. And this is just really the beginning. We're actually told about a little bit more about these frogs in Psalm 105:30. Their land brought forth frogs in abundance in the chambers of their kings. So all the rulers, all the governors, not just Pharaoh's chambers, not just Pharaoh's bed, but also all over the other leaders. So this was a very big plague. And the frogs shall come up both on thee and upon thy people and upon all thy servants. So I'm thinking that as we learn just a few verses later, how these frogs are literally everywhere, even in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites are. So, and we'll get to that right here in just a few minutes. So, but there comes a point in this chapter whenever God makes a clear distinction between Egypt and the land of Goshen within Egypt, because that's where the vast majority of the Israelite slaves are. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying to Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. Covered. I don't know, frogs are nasty to me. I used to shoot them with a BB gun around ponds and stuff, and oh man, they just nasty. Like the bigger, the nastier they are. And I'm guessing these were pretty good sized frogs. But you have to know that it's like he's taking the simple steps first. It's like the water into blood that only remained for a week. Okay, so that came and that went. That was just showing the power of the Lord. Now we're seeing him send frogs. Frogs, they don't typically harm humans at all. Now, there might be poison ones here and there, but for the most part, frogs, all they do is they eat insects and I guess little snakes and stuff like that, depending on their size and type and whatnot. But these frogs would not have bitten the Egyptians. I'm making a point in this, and it's coming up right here in a second. And the magicians did so with their enchantments and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt. Obviously, this is something supernatural, because they are able to bring up the frogs. But catch that, they're not able to make them go away. A much greater miracle would have been making them go away. It's just like how they turned the water in the previous chapter, how the Pharaoh's magicians turned the water into blood, like God did the Nile. But it's like a greater miracle would have been turning it into normal fresh water, you know? And so the all that they're doing is it's the same point made in the last chapter, how the works of Satan always are deadly. He'll bring about death. Remember the book of Job. It's like, yeah, Satan, he can give you cars, fame, money, and all these things that God allows him to do. He can do all those things, but none of them are really beneficial for you. None of them are life-giving as it is. You never do see Satan healing people. He doesn't do that. Satan doesn't make anything good because only God is good. But a far greater miracle would have been for them to get rid of the frogs. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Entreat the Lord." Obviously, he knows what this plague is coming from. Now, this is a plague of frogs, mind you. This is a plague of frogs. This isn't just a bunch of frogs. They're everywhere. Everywhere. It's completely uncomfortable. And the noise, imagine just the noise of these frogs. I mean, at night, I remember we would go hunting at night and it just, rabbit hunting, spotlight stuff. Sometimes coyote hunting. But anyway, but we would go hunting at night and you could hear these frogs and man, just one or two of them are just brrr, brrr. Imagine millions of them everywhere. I mean, that is complete. I mean, you could kill them, but here's the thing about it is that, and we'll get to more of this here in a second, they didn't like killing frogs in Egypt. They seen them as sacred. We'll get to that right here in a second. But the Pharaoh, he asked Moses and Aaron, "Entreat the Lord," meaning intercede for me, pray to God, "that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord." And Moses said unto Pharaoh, "Glory over me, when shall I entreat for thee, and for thy servants, and for thy people, to destroy the frogs from thee and thy houses, that they may remain in the river only?" And he said, "Tomorrow." And Moses replied, "Be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God." I'm sure that you all have heard a lot of this, how he says tomorrow, spending one more night with the frogs and such. I do believe that there was a reason why now we're not told the reason, but there's a reason why he says tomorrow. I believe that he's preparing or something, or maybe thinking this over, because this is the first time in which Pharaoh is actually starting to give a little. He's starting to say, "Okay, I don't like this. Do something." So you start to see him lightening up a little bit, or at least he wants these plagues to lighten up. "And the frogs shall depart from thee, and from thy houses, and from thy servants, and from thy people. They shall remain in the river only." And Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. Now this right here is a far better image of what they were probably facing. See, frogs are everywhere. Literally everywhere. You can barely see the ground for the frogs. And this is pretty much just the beginning of what God has planned for these Egyptians. "And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the villages, and out of the fields. And they gathered them together upon heaps, and the land stank." Now this would have been a very devastating day for these Egyptians, I'm sure. Why a plague of frogs? Since frogs came from the Nile, they were associated with fertility, rebirth, and therefore childbirth. The Egyptian goddess Heket was shown as a woman with a frog head. So the plague of the frogs attacks the Egyptians' belief in the Nile and in fertility and childbirth. So right here we're seeing frogs coming from the Nile River against the Egyptian god Heket. Here would be a depiction of Heket. Hieroglyph, whatever you want to call it. Heket, the Egyptian goddess of fertility, water, and renewal. Heket, the Egyptian goddess, had the head of a frog. They had to put these frogs, so many of them died that they had to put them in heaps, and they stank in the entire land. And they viewed the frogs as sacred. They didn't like killing the frogs, and I believe that was the main reason why God, now this is all conjecture on my part, but I believe that it's because they didn't want to kill the frogs. They didn't want to kill them, so God says, well, if you like frogs, if you want to worship them, here they are. I'm going to put them everywhere around you. You want these gods to be omnipresent? They'll be everywhere. So he puts them everywhere, and then all of a sudden they don't like these frogs anymore. Frogs aren't all that cool after a while, but then they have to kill these sacred things to them and put them in heaps and smell the stink from them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart and hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. So we see in the beginning he refuses. He already has a hard heart from the beginning. You can read Exodus 5, just the first few verses, and see that. But he starts out with a hard heart. But then we see God hardening his heart. And now we're seeing he hardens his heart again. And hearken not unto them as the Lord had said. And respite just means a calm whenever things finally got calm again and all of that. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. So here is this plague. And these are biters. These things bite. Here's someone with head lice. There's different kinds of lice. There's head lice, body lice, pubic lice. They get everywhere, literally every crack and crevice on your skin. They also get on animals. And the thing about them getting on these animals and biting them, they would taint these animals so that they couldn't make sacrifices. And not only did they just have to kill millions upon millions of these sacred frogs, now they can't even make sacrifices to their other gods. So worship of their gods is stopped. And I believe it's kind of a way of showing how an unbeliever or a pagan is after death, how their gods don't save them, how only God is still there, and he's the only one who really has sole power over everything. Yeah, these things, they get all around you. They get in your eyes. They get everywhere. Right here's what they do. You'll mainly find them how they'll bite you at the back of the neck, nape of the neck, I believe it's called. But then you have body lice that just get on you and start biting you all over. Even the beast would experience this. See, many insects are attracted to our eyes, especially like gnats and stuff. And the reason why is because they love our tears. Believe it or not, I don't know why. It's that moistness, that hot moistness. Probably got something in it too. Lice would have been a very hard-hitting plague for Egyptians because Egypt was really about hygiene. They were very, very hygienic. And here's an article on Ancient History Encyclopedia about the cosmetics, perfume, and hygiene in ancient Egypt. The article begins like this. For the ancient Egyptians, life was a celebration, and so just as one would want to look one's best at any party, personal hygiene was an important cultural value. The Egyptians bathed daily, shaved their heads to prevent lice or other problems, and regularly used cosmetics, perfumes, and breath mints. So now we're starting to see the devastation that they were probably feeling from these plagues because they didn't even like to stink or anything, and all of a sudden you have this river, their sacred river. It stunk for 7 days. It smelled like dead, probably just dead blood or whatever. And now we see these heaps of frogs and how they stunk up the land, and they always use perfumes. They love to smell good. Now things are starting to stink. And I believe that this is a part of hell. I believe it's kind of like hell. It's like God is showing, and I believe this is what happens whenever people go to hell. They completely lose their comfort. Everything stinks. It's hot, humid, plague, just everything. It's my opinion on it anyway. But personal hygiene, they would even shave their head to prevent lice. And now they have a plague of lice all over them. Ironically, to the Egyptians, one who was infected with lice was considered impure. This plague halted all religious practice in Egypt. So I guess the entire land is considered impure at this time. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. So now the Egyptians are seeing the limits of this demonic realm. of their little gods. They're starting to see who the true God is. Yeah, Satan's got some power, but it's very limited, and it stops very early. Let that be a lesson to us. How, yeah, Satan may strike you for a time, but it's not going to last very long. Then the magician said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. A truly reprobate mind. He doesn't even listen to his counsel anymore. He's very, very hardened towards all of these things. He's probably just angry. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. I think that God was allowing the Jewish people to feel a little bit of his wrath. That way they could see some of what he could do. But because oftentimes it's just like a child who's never had a butt whooping. And I got plenty of them growing up. But if they've never had their butt busted for being mean or anything, then they don't really appreciate not having it busted. you know, I mean, mercy is so much sweeter whenever you know the ramifications of not having mercy. So I do believe that this is the point where God says, okay, no more upon my people. And this is the first mention of him actually making a divide. And I will put a division between my people and thy people. Tomorrow shall this sign be. And the Lord did so. And there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted by reason of the swarm of flies. Now, stop right there. Now, you're probably just thinking that it's flies, right? Well, flies, they don't bite you or anything. Well, you have to look deeper into the meaning behind this swarm of flies. If you look in your Strong's Exhaustive, you'll see the word flies in this instance. It is arob, and swarm of flies is basically what you're looking up right here. It's the swarm word that it's mainly implying. So flies, it's arob, meaning a mosquito from its swarming. Okay, so this is a mosquito. These are mosquitoes and then some. Because in Psalm 78:45 we read, He sent diverse sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. Again in Psalm 105, He spake, and there came diverse sorts of flies, and lice in all their coast. So these were biting insects. With the lice, we've seen how because lice, they're wingless, they don't fly, but they'll crawl right up on you. With these, they are flying and biting. So with the frogs, we've seen that, yeah, they're nasty, they're gross, they're everywhere, but at least they're not biting you. With the lice, yeah, they're very, very nasty, and they're very invasive, and they get right on up in there, and they get in all cracks, crevices, and they bite, but they don't fly. Now we're seeing with these mosquitoes, gnats, probably flies as well. Now we're seeing with these how these are biting insects, but they're also flying insects. Now these are getting everywhere. This would have been incredibly, not just annoying. This would have been, oh man, this would have been terrible. One mosquito bite kills me. In this article we read about gnats. Have you ever had a gnat? Of course you have. If you've lived on this earth a year, you've had this happen. Like a gnat, it'll come around your eye. They always seem to go for the eyes, don't they? Well, there's a reason behind it. They crave your tears, while gnats go for the eyes. The article says right here, the tiny flies have the annoying habit of swarming around your face and landing on the corners of your eyes. You can try shooing them away, but they are a persistent pest, and their populations are thick this time of year in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. It says that they breed in the lawns and along the parks, hot, humid areas. They're attracted to humans, as we see right there. And we read right here what they really are after are tears. They're attracted to lacrimal secretions from the eyes. This is why they're always flying around your eyes. They're attracted to your tears. And if you don't think the mosquito bites are bad, as I said, one can just irritate you to death. This right here would absolutely just be. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't do it. All it does is itch. They literally can just eat up your entire body with their bites, and they spread disease. They're very bad about spreading disease. Here are just a few of the diseases caused by flies and mosquitoes: salmonella, dysentery, tuberculosis, cholera, parasitic worms, lymphatic, Zika fever, yellow fever, West Nile virus, Rift Valley fever. Here's a little graph about the world's most lethal animals. Most people are frightened of sharks. Statistically, however, other animals are more dangerous, as figures from World Health Organization show. Mosquitoes and the diseases they transmit claim the highest number of victims each year, with 725,000 fatalities. 100,000 people are killed by snake bites, 60,000 by rabies transmitted by dogs. Sharks are responsible for about 10 deaths every year. So mosquitoes are the biggest killers. And Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron and said, "Go ye, sacrifice to your God in the land." Keep that. He's wanting to keep them within Egypt, in the general vicinity, that is. And Moses said, "It is not meet so to do. For we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, and will they not stone us?" Moses says, look, we sacrifice cows to God and rams, and you all worship those things. He says they'll kill us. It's like sacrificing a pig in a Muslim country, or a cow in a Hindu country, or a pig in a Jewish country, even. So I mean, this is an abomination to the Egyptians. He said they'll riot against us. That was the whole point of the 3 days journey, so that they could at least get away from there and do it. We will go 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he shall command us. And Pharaoh said, "I will let you go, that ye may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only ye shall not go very far away. Entreat for me." He says, "Pray for me." And Moses said, "Behold, I go out from thee, and I will entreat the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully any more, in not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord." And Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. There remained not one. And Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also, neither would he let the people go. That is absolutely incredible. We know that pride goeth before destruction. And I am convinced that this Pharaoh is he's a big, major type of a foreshadowing of the Antichrist to come. I believe he is that hardened at heart. In WW2, we see on this BBC article how we see a year by year summary of what happened during World War II. And we see in 1933 the Nazis take power. Next year Hitler declared Führer. Then anti-Semitism as law was in 1935. Then the Third Reich went on a show in the Olympics, 1936. Escalation of anti-Jewish propaganda was in 1937. Jewish persecution began to intensify in 1938. But all the way down here, we start to see in 1943, right before the war was over, and Hitler was losing. This Pharaoh reminds me of Hitler. Hitler reminds me of the Pharaoh. Germany was now losing the war. Vital resources were still plowed into implementing the final solution, the extermination of all Jews in Europe. Uprisings broke out in some extermination camps. The few remaining Jews kept alive to dispose of bodies and sort possessions realized the number of transportees was reducing and they would be next. Civilian uprisings occurred across Poland as many young Jews whose families had already been murdered began to resist Nazi oppression. With reports of rebellion and mass murder in the British press, the situation in the camps could no longer be ignored. And the reason why I read that, very, very good reason to close on today's study. When Hitler seen that he was losing the war, he didn't turn all of his attention to a defensive stance or into an offensive attack against the Allies. He didn't do that. Hitler was so reprobate and so proud and so focused on annihilating the Jews that he turned much of his attention to just killing the Jews. He didn't turn to God. He didn't fear the death of, no, he believed in evolution. He believed, I'm doing a work for humanity and they'll remember me as a god for the next 1,000 years or whatever. And this is the perfect showing of a reprobate mind. How evil is exceeding. We hear in Paul's letters how the exceeding sinfulness of sin, it's like a drunk, how they just keep drinking, even though it's killing them, they just keep drinking. They can't get enough drink or drugs or anything. That's why people overdose, because they just got to have more and more and more and more. And so they escalate on the wrong end of the spectrum. Instead of trying to do good for once and not do evil, they all of a sudden want to do more evil than they've ever done before. And we're seeing this with this Pharaoh in this chapter. It just amazes me how they just have no fear of God. They're just completely blinded. God gives them over to their evil. I also believe that this tells us a lot about Satan. I believe that God's given him over to a complete reprobate mind. I believe that he's had one for thousands of years. And just like Hitler, just like the Pharaoh, I believe that Satan he sees that his time is coming. He knows that God's more powerful. He just wants to do as much evil as possible before the time is up, because he knows his time is short. In Revelation 12, you can read that. But that does it for today's study. I do hope that you learned something. Lord of peace be with you all. Amen.